The radio crackled to life during what should have been a routine training exercise, cutting through the static with words that made every pilot's blood run cold. Viper, this is NORAD. We have a situation. Unknown aircraft, multiple contacts, penetrating restricted airspace. You are the only asset qualified for intercept. The same commanders who had spent weeks mocking her outdated flight techniques and questioning her credentials suddenly went silent, their faces draining of color as they realized the woman they had tried to humiliate was about to become their only hope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert heat shimmered off the tarmac at Holloman Air Force Base as Captain Morgan Steele stepped through the security checkpoint, her faded leather flight jacket draped over standard-issue fatigues that had seen better days. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple braid, no nonsense and functional, and her face bore the kind of weathered look that came from years of actual flight time rather than simulator hours. In her hands, she carried a worn flight manual with dog-eared pages and handwritten notes in the margins, not the sleek digital tablets that seemed to be standard issue for everyone else on base. The fighter weapons school compound buzzed with activity as she made her way toward the main operations building. F-22 Raptors screamed overhead in perfect formation, their afterburners leaving contrails across the brilliant blue New Mexico sky. Young pilots in pristine flight suits moved with confident swagger between buildings, their patches and insignia gleaming like trophies in the harsh sunlight. As Morgan walked deeper into the facility, she noticed the conversations around her beginning to fade. Heads turned, eyes followed her movement with undisguised curiosity mixed with something else, something that felt uncomfortably like contempt. "Can I help you find something?" a voice called out from behind her, dripping with false politeness. Morgan turned to see Captain Shane Griffith, a tall man in his early 30s with perfectly pressed flight suit and aviator sunglasses pushed up on his head. His patches indicated he was an instructor pilot, and his expression suggested he was enjoying this moment far too much. "I'm reporting for advanced tactical training," Morgan replied evenly, pulling her assignment orders from her jacket pocket. Griffith took the papers, his eyebrows rising as he scanned them. "Captain Morgan Steele," he read aloud, his voice carrying across the courtyard with theatrical emphasis. "Call sign, Viper." He paused, letting out a low whistle. "Well, well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got ourselves a Viper in the nest." Several other pilots had gathered now, drawn by the commotion. Their laughter was sharp and unwelcoming. "The tactical program?" another voice chimed in. Lieutenant Colonel Carl Whitmore stepped forward, his chest heavy with ribbons and his expression skeptical. "That's our most advanced course. Are you sure you have the right building? The transport division is on the other side of the base." Morgan kept her expression neutral, though she felt the familiar weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, sir."
Whitmore studied her orders more carefully, his frown deepening. "Your file is remarkably thin, Captain. I see a few routine assignments, some basic flight certifications, but nothing that would indicate you're qualified for weapons school. No documented combat experience, no advanced systems training on record." He handed the papers back with barely concealed disdain. "Who exactly recommended you for this program?" "That information is classified, sir," Morgan said quietly. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Griffith exchanged glances with Whitmore, both men's expressions shifting from skepticism to active hostility. "Classified," Griffith repeated, his voice mocking. "How convenient. Let me guess, you've got some secret mission history that explains why your record looks like it belongs to someone who spent their entire career flying a desk?" "I've spent my career flying aircraft, Captain, just not the kind that get documented in public records." "Right," Whitmore said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe a word. "Well, Captain Steele, or should I say Viper," he emphasized her call sign with obvious sarcasm, "let me be very clear about something. This program has standards, real standards, based on proven performance and documented excellence. We don't have time for mystery pilots with thin files and vague references to classified operations. Before Morgan could respond, a woman's voice cut through the tension. Colonel Whitmore, Commander Hammond is requesting your presence in the briefing room. Morgan turned to see Lieutenant Sophia Morales, a young pilot with sharp eyes and a carefully neutral expression. Morales gave Morgan the briefest of glances, something that might have been sympathy flickering across her face before she looked away. Whitmore straightened. "We'll continue this conversation later, Captain Steele. Report to administration and get your temporary credentials. We'll see how long you last." He strode away, Griffith following with one last condescending smirk in Morgan's direction. As the crowd dispersed, Morgan stood alone in the courtyard, feeling the weight of hostile stares like physical pressure. She had known this wouldn't be easy. Her service record had been deliberately scrubbed for national security reasons, years of classified missions in denied territories reduced to vague notations and redacted files. To these people, she looked like an imposter, someone who had somehow gamed the system to get into a program she had no business being in. They had no idea they were looking at one of the most experienced combat pilots the Air Force had ever produced, someone whose skills had been honed in situations these hotshot instructors could barely imagine. Her call sign wasn't some clever nickname. It had been earned through 6 years of electronic warfare missions, penetrating enemy airspace in aircraft that officially didn't exist, flying profiles so dangerous that the Pentagon kept them buried under layers of classification even a decade later. But none of that mattered here. Here, she was just another pilot with a thin file and outdated equipment, an easy target for ridicule and dismissal. Morgan adjusted her grip on her worn flight manual and headed toward the administration building. She had faced surface-to-air missiles and hostile fighters in the dark over enemy territory. She could certainly handle the egos of a few instructors who confused arrogance with competence. The battle lines had been drawn, and Captain Morgan, Viper Steele, was just getting started.
The next morning arrived with the kind of brutal desert heat that made even breathing feel like work. Morgan reported to the main briefing room at 05:30, a full 30 minutes before the scheduled start time. She chose a seat in the back corner, hoping to observe the dynamics before fully engaging with the program. One by one, the other pilots filtered in, all men, all wearing flight suits that looked like they'd been professionally tailored. Their patches told stories of prestigious assignments, advanced training programs, and connections to elite squadrons. They moved with the easy confidence of people who had never been told they didn't belong. Captain Griffith entered exactly at 6 o'clock hours, his eyes immediately scanning the room until they locked onto Morgan with unmistakable satisfaction. "Well, well," he announced loudly, ensuring every pilot in the room turned to look. "Our mysterious guest decided to grace us with her presence. Captain Steele, since you're so eager to be here, perhaps you'd like to share with the class what makes you qualified for advanced tactical training." 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Some faces showed smirks, others barely concealed curiosity, but none showed respect or welcome. "I'm here to learn and contribute, Captain, same as everyone else." Griffith's smile took on a predatory edge. "Oh, but you're not the same as everyone else, are you? These pilots," he gestured to the room, "have documented flight hours, proven combat experience, and records that actually exist. You've got classified mysteries and a thin file that raises more questions than it answers." He let the words hang in the air, watching her reaction. When Morgan simply met his gaze without flinching, he changed tactics. "Since you're so confident, let's start with something basic. Walk us through the proper engagement sequence for a beyond visual range intercept against multiple hostile contacts." It was a test, deliberately technical and designed to expose any gaps in her knowledge. But Morgan had flown real intercept missions against actual threats, not just trained for them in simulators. Establish positive identification through interrogation systems and AWACS coordination. Prioritize threats based on geometry, capability, and mission parameters.
Employ longest-range weapons first against highest priority targets while maintaining tactical flexibility for engagement dynamics. Manage fuel state and weapon expenditure to maintain combat effectiveness throughout the encounter. The room fell silent. Her answer was textbook perfect, but delivered with the kind of practical understanding that only came from real experience. Griffith's expression hardened. Textbook answer, Captain, but combat isn't about reciting procedures. It's about split-second decisions under pressure, situations you clearly haven't faced. For the remainder of the briefing, Griffith pointedly ignored Morgan's raised hand whenever he posed questions to the group. When he distributed flight assignments for the day's training sorties, he deliberately walked past her seat without leaving any materials. "Excuse me, Captain," Morgan said as the other pilots began filing out. "I didn't receive my assignment." Griffith turned slowly, his expression cold and dismissive. "That's correct. You'll be observing today. We need to establish your actual baseline capabilities before we put you in an aircraft. Can't have you damaging expensive equipment because you don't know what you're doing." Laughter rippled through the remaining pilots as they gathered their gear and headed for the flight line.
During the lunch break, Morgan sat alone in the dining facility, the empty chairs around her table creating an invisible barrier that no one dared cross. She noticed Lieutenant Morales hesitate near her table, a food tray in hand, clearly wrestling with some internal decision. For a moment, it seemed like the younger pilot might actually sit down. Then Morales caught sight of Griffith watching from across the room, and she quickly moved to join a group of male pilots instead. The isolation was deliberate and absolute. A shadow fell across Morgan's table as Commander Brett Hammond approached, coffee mug in hand. He was a stocky man in his late 40s, with steel gray hair and a face that suggested he'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. "Captain Steele," he said, his tone falsely conversational. "I understand Captain Griffith has you on observation status today." "Yes, sir," Morgan replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Smart approach. Walk before you run, as they say." He paused, studying her with calculating eyes. "You know, there's no shame in recognizing when you're in over your head. We have other positions on base that might be better suited to someone with your particular qualifications, administrative roles, logistics coordination, that sort of thing. I appreciate your concern, Commander, but I'm here for flight training." Hammond's expression shifted instantly from false friendliness to open hostility. "Let me be perfectly frank, Captain. This program has a 92% washout rate. The 8% who make it through are the best of the best, pilots with proven records and documented excellence. You have neither." "With respect, sir, my record exists. It's just classified." "Classified," Hammond repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "How convenient. Every pilot who can't cut it has an excuse, Captain. Yours is just more creative than most." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I've been running this program for 6 years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. You don't. It's only a matter of time before that becomes obvious to everyone, including you." As he walked away, Morgan noticed several pilots watching the exchange, their expressions mixing pity with satisfaction. One muttered something that made the others laugh. She couldn't hear the exact words, but the mockery in their voices was unmistakable. That afternoon brought her first real test. While other pilots were assigned complex training scenarios in the simulators, Morgan was relegated to reviewing basic flight procedures that she had mastered over a decade ago. The message couldn't have been clearer. They would keep her busy with meaningless busy work while excluding her from actual training. But as she sat alone with her worn flight manual, Morgan began documenting everything in a small notebook. Every slight, every deviation from standard protocol, every instance of unprofessional conduct. If they wanted to play games, she would be ready.
She had come too far and sacrificed too much to be intimidated by small-minded commanders who confused institutional gatekeeping with actual competence. By the end of the first week, Morgan's exclusion had evolved from passive dismissal to active sabotage. The pattern was clear and deliberate. Every opportunity for actual flight training was systematically denied, while she was buried under mountains of administrative busywork that had nothing to do with advanced tactical operations. On Monday morning, she arrived to find her locker assignment had been changed. Her flight gear sat in a cardboard box outside the women's locker room, accompanied by a terse note: "Space reallocation due to facility optimization. See administration for new assignment." When Morgan brought this to Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore's attention, he barely looked up from his paperwork. "Space is limited, Captain. Priority goes to active training participants. Since you are still in evaluation status, your lowest priority for facility usage." "I have the same clearance level as every other pilot in this program," Morgan pointed out, keeping her voice level despite the frustration building in her chest. "On paper, perhaps," Whitmore replied with a cold smile. "I suggest you keep your equipment in your quarters or find alternative storage solutions." The message was clear. She didn't belong, and they would make sure she felt it every single day. That afternoon brought another calculated humiliation. During a technical briefing on weapons systems integration, the instructor, a major named Derek Phillips, was explaining missile employment parameters when Morgan noticed a critical error in his presentation. The slide showed fuel consumption rates that didn't match the actual specifications for the AA-120 AAMRAM missile, a mistake that could lead to serious miscalculations during real combat operations. Morgan raised her hand hesitantly. The room fell into uncomfortable silence. "Yes, Captain Steele," Phillips said, making her name sound like an insult. "Do you have a question?" "Sir, the fuel consumption rates on that slide appear to be for the earlier C variant of the AMRAAM. The current D variant has significantly different performance characteristics that would affect employment range calculations." Several pilots exchanged uncomfortable glances. She was absolutely right, and they knew it. Phillips's face flushed red. "That's a minor technical detail only relevant in very specific edge cases, which we are not discussing in this overview briefing. With respect, sir, range calculations are fundamental to employment decisions. Using incorrect data could lead to mission failure or worse." "Thank you for your input, Captain," Phillips snapped. "However, I've been teaching this course for 3 years. I think I know what information is relevant." After the briefing ended, as Morgan gathered her notes with trembling hands, she felt someone approach from behind. "You were right about the fuel consumption rates," Lieutenant Morales said quietly, glancing around nervously to ensure no one was listening. "Phillips has been using that outdated slide for months. Several of us noticed, but no one wanted to correct him." "Why not?" Morgan asked, genuinely puzzled.
Morales gave her a look that mixed sympathy with frustration. "Because correcting instructors gets you labeled as a problem, and problems don't graduate from this program." She paused, then lowered her voice even further. "Look, I need to warn you about something. They're planning to put you in the simulator tomorrow for what they're calling a baseline assessment." "That sounds reasonable," Morgan said. "It's not," Morales replied urgently. "They're going to use the gauntlet scenario." Morgan's expression must have shown her confusion, because Morales continued quickly. "It's a simulator program with multiple cascading emergencies in a high-threat environment. System failures, enemy aircraft, weather, everything all at once. It's designed to be nearly impossible. They normally don't use it until week 6, and even then, most pilots barely survive 5 minutes before the simulation ends in catastrophic failure." "Why are they using it on me now?" "Because they want you to fail spectacularly," Morales said bluntly. "Hammond and Griffith have been telling everyone you're not qualified. Tomorrow is their chance to prove it in front of the entire training cadre." Before Morgan could respond, Captain Griffith appeared in the doorway, his eyes narrowing dangerously as he saw them talking. "Lieutenant Morales, your flight brief starts in 5 minutes. I suggest you stop fraternizing and get yourself prepared." Morales straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." She gave Morgan one last apologetic glance before hurrying away. Griffith turned his attention to Morgan, his expression radiating smug satisfaction. "I hope you're ready for tomorrow's assessment, Captain. It's going to be quite revealing." "I'm ready for whatever you've planned," Morgan replied calmly. "We'll see about that." His smile was predatory. "The simulator doesn't lie, Steele. It shows exactly what a pilot is made of, and tomorrow everyone's going to see exactly what you are, someone who doesn't belong here." As he walked away, Morgan felt something shift inside her. They weren't just trying to discourage her anymore. This was a deliberate setup, a public execution designed to justify removing her from the program entirely and to send a message to any other pilot who didn't fit their narrow definition of what belonged in a fighter cockpit. That evening, Morgan sat in her sparse quarters, reviewing everything she knew about complex emergency scenarios. Her classified service record was filled with situations that made simulator emergencies look like training exercises. She had flown through actual surface-to-air missile engagements, dealt with real system failures over hostile territory, and brought damaged aircraft home when every instrument was telling her to eject. But none of that mattered to Hammond and Griffith. They saw only what they wanted to see: an outsider with a thin file and outdated methods, someone who threatened their comfortable hierarchy simply by existing. They had made one crucial mistake, though. They assumed the gauntlet scenario would break her because it broke everyone else. What they didn't understand was that Morgan had spent 6 years flying missions where failure meant death, not just a failed training score. Tomorrow, they would learn the difference between simulator warriors and combat veterans. And Morgan intended to make it a lesson they would never forget. She pulled out her worn flight manual and began reviewing emergency procedures one more time. Not because she needed the practice, but because preparation was what separated survivors from casualties. The battle was coming, and Captain Morgan, Viper Steele, was ready for war.
The simulator bay was packed with observers when Morgan arrived the next morning. Officers who normally had no interest in routine baseline assessments suddenly found compelling reasons to be present. They lined the observation windows like spectators at a gladiatorial arena, their expressions ranging from curious anticipation to barely concealed satisfaction. Commander Hammond stood at the central control console alongside Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore and Captain Griffith, the three of them speaking in low conspiratorial tones while occasionally glancing toward Morgan with cold calculation. "Quite a crowd for a baseline assessment," Colonel Raymond Bishop observed as he entered the room. Bishop was the base commander, a quiet man in his late 50s who had largely remained neutral during the ongoing drama. His presence now suggested he had heard enough rumors to warrant personal observation. "Just ensuring proper documentation of training standards, sir," Hammond replied smoothly. "Captain Steele's unconventional background requires careful evaluation." Bishop studied the simulation parameters displayed on the monitor, his eyebrows rising slightly. "The gauntlet scenario? That's aggressive for a first assessment." "Captain Steele has claimed significant experience, sir," Griffith interjected quickly. "We're simply giving her the opportunity to demonstrate those capabilities." Through the observation window, Morgan could see the simulator cockpit waiting like a steel trap. She methodically checked her flight suit, ensured her helmet was properly secured, and approached the simulator with the same calm focus she had brought to every mission in her career. As she climbed into the cockpit and began strapping in, Lieutenant Morales appeared at the observation window, her face tight with worry. Their eyes met briefly, and Morales gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of support before looking away. "Beginning gauntlet scenario in 3, 2, 1. Hammond announced over the intercom system, his voice carrying a note of anticipation that made several officers exchange knowing glances. The simulation began with standard flight parameters: clear weather, normal systems, routine patrol pattern. Then, without warning, the peaceful scenario exploded into chaos. Multiple warning alarms shrieked as the radar display lit up with hostile contacts. Enemy fighters appeared from 3 different vectors, closing fast. Simultaneously, critical systems began failing in rapid succession. Hydraulic pressure dropped to dangerous levels. The right engine flamed out. Navigation systems flickered and died. Morgan's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, prioritizing threats while managing the cascade of failures. She executed a defensive split, forcing the pursuing aircraft to choose targets while she dealt with the most critical system failures first. In the observation room, the casual chatter had died completely. Officers watched in growing amazement as Morgan not only kept the aircraft flying, but began systematically addressing each emergency with techniques that weren't in any standard manual. She's using manual reversion on the flight controls. That's not even in the Gauntlet training protocol. Where did she learn that? Another whispered. Hammond's confident expression began to falter as seconds turned to minutes, and Morgan continued to fly. At the 3-minute mark, typically where even experienced pilots started losing control, she successfully evaded 2 missile launches and stabilized the damaged aircraft. Griffith leaned toward Hammond, his voice urgent but quiet. Add the weather parameters. She can't handle everything at once. Hammond's fingers moved across the control panel, introducing severe weather conditions, violent turbulence, zero visibility, ice accumulation on the wings. The simulation now presented a combination of challenges that should have been impossible to manage simultaneously.
Still, Morgan continued flying. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, her movements precise and efficient. She was no longer fighting the simulation, she was dancing with it, anticipating each new challenge and adapting with fluid expertise that came only from real-world experience under genuine life-or-death pressure. System limitations approaching maximum parameters, the computer announced in its mechanical voice. Scenario complexity exceeds standard training protocols. At 5 minutes, Morgan had not only kept the aircraft flying, but had begun turning the tables on her virtual adversaries. Using terrain masking and unconventional tactics, she evaded additional missile launches and positioned herself for counterattack. Colonel Bishop leaned forward, his attention completely focused on the display. "Remarkable," he said quietly. Hammond's face had gone pale. This wasn't going according to plan at all. He reached for the console to add another failure, but Bishop's hand stopped him. "I think we've seen enough, Commander," Bishop said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "Let's see how this plays out." At 5 minutes, Morgan had not only kept the aircraft flying, but had begun turning the tables on her virtual adversaries. Using terrain masking and unconventional tactics, she evaded additional missile launches and positioned herself for counterattack. Colonel Bishop leaned forward, his attention completely focused on the display. "Remarkable," he said quietly. Hammond's face had gone pale. This wasn't going according to plan at all. He reached for the console to add another failure, but Bishop's hand stopped him. "I think we've seen enough, Commander," Bishop said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "Let's see how this plays out." At 5 minutes, Morgan had not only kept the aircraft flying, but had begun turning the tables on her virtual adversaries. Using terrain masking and unconventional tactics, she evaded additional missile launches and positioned herself for counterattack. When the simulation finally ended at 8 minutes, with her aircraft intact and mission parameters achieved, the observation room fell into stunned silence. Morgan removed her helmet, her hair damp with sweat, but her expression calm and composed. As she climbed out of the simulator, she expected at least grudging acknowledgement of what she had accomplished. Instead, she was met with stony faces and carefully averted eyes. "System malfunction," Hammond announced, loudly, his voice carrying across the suddenly tense room. "The scenario parameters were clearly corrupted. Results are invalid." "That's not true, sir," Lieutenant Morales protested, stepping forward despite the obvious risk to her career. "I monitored the entire sequence. The system functioned perfectly. She completed the scenario." "That's enough, Lieutenant," Whittemore snapped. "Commander Hammond has determined that technical difficulties compromised the assessment. The results cannot be validated." Morgan stood among the hostile faces, understanding with crystalline clarity that no accomplishment would ever be sufficient.
The rules would simply change to ensure her failure because her success threatened the very foundation of their prejudices and their carefully constructed hierarchy. "You all saw what happened in there," Morgan said, quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Every one of you knows exactly what I did." "What we know," Hammond replied coldly, his composure cracking slightly, "is that you don't belong here. You never have, and you never will. Save yourself further embarrassment and resign from this program, Captain." As the officers filed out, some laughing openly at what they chose to interpret as a desperate attempt to claim victory from obvious system failure, Morden felt something inside her shift. Not her resolve, which remained unshaken, but her patience had finally reached its absolute limit. The war was about to escalate to a level Hammond and Griffith couldn't possibly anticipate.
That evening, Morgan sat alone in her quarters, the weight of the day's events settling over her like a physical burden. She had proven her capabilities beyond any reasonable doubt, and yet it had made no difference whatsoever. The system wasn't designed to recognize merit. It was designed to protect itself from anyone who challenged its comfortable assumptions. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Lieutenant Morales standing in the hallway, glancing nervously in both directions before stepping inside quickly. "What you did today was extraordinary," Morales said without preamble, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "Everyone in that observation room saw it. They know Hammond lied about the system malfunction." "Knowing and acknowledging are two different things," Morgan replied wearily, gesturing for Morales to sit. "That's why I'm here." Morales pulled a small flash drive from her pocket. "I downloaded the complete data recording from your simulator run before Hammond could delete it. Every parameter, every input, every system response. Proof that you not only completed the gauntlet, but did it using techniques none of us have ever seen before." Morgan stared at the device, understanding its significance. "Thank you, but what good does this do? They'll just claim it's been tampered with or find some other excuse to dismiss it." "Maybe," Morales admitted, "but there's more you need to know." She lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "Colonel Bishop requested a full investigation into the training program. He's been hearing complaints for months, not just about you, but about systemic issues with how evaluations are conducted." Bishop seemed troubled by what he saw today. He was, and he's not the only one. Morales leaned forward, her expression intense. "There are other pilots who've been driven out of this program unfairly, 3 in the last 2 years alone, all for reasons that had nothing to do with their actual flying abilities. Bishop is finally paying attention." Morgan felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by caution. "That doesn't change the fact that Hammond controls the day-to-day operations. He can make my life hell until any investigation concludes." "That's why you need to be ready," Morales said urgently. "Hammond is planning something. I overheard him and Griffith talking after everyone left. They're setting up another scenario for you, something they're calling the final evaluation." "Another impossible test?" "Worse, they're going to put you in an actual aircraft with Griffith as your evaluator. A live flight evaluation with parameters they control completely. No digital records, no observers, just their word against yours about your performance." Morgan's jaw tightened. A live flight evaluation gave them even more room to manipulate the outcome. They could claim she made errors that never happened, failed to execute maneuvers properly, or demonstrated unsafe flying practices. Without witnesses or objective data, it would be impossible to disprove their claims. "When?" Morgan asked. "Tomorrow afternoon. They're announcing it as a routine evaluation flight, but I'm telling you, they're planning something." After Morales left, Morgan spent hours reviewing every regulation governing flight evaluations, looking for any protection against obvious bias or fraudulent assessment. The rules were clear enough on paper, but they all assumed good faith from evaluators. They provided little recourse when the evaluators themselves were corrupt.
The next morning arrived with overcast skies and gusty winds, conditions that would make flying challenging even under normal circumstances. Morgan reported to the flight line to find her aircraft already prepared, an F-15C Eagle that looked pristine on the outside, but whose maintenance history she hadn't been allowed to review. Captain Griffith stood beside the aircraft, flight suit immaculate, his expression radiating smug confidence. "Ready for your final evaluation, Captain Steele?" "I'm ready to fly," Morgan replied evenly. "Excellent." Griffith handed her a clipboard with the flight plan. "We'll be conducting advanced tactical maneuvers, high-G turns, weapons delivery profiles, and emergency procedures. Standard stuff for any qualified pilot." Morgan scanned the flight plan, immediately noticing several irregularities. The maneuvers were far more aggressive than typical evaluation profiles, and the sequence was designed to be exhausting, pushing physical limits before testing technical skills. "This profile exceeds normal evaluation parameters," she pointed out. "For most pilots, perhaps, but you've claimed exceptional capabilities. Consider this your opportunity to prove it." As Morgan conducted her pre-flight inspection, she noticed Lieutenant Morales watching from near the operations building, her expression deeply troubled. Several other pilots had gathered as well, drawn by word that something significant was about to happen. Commander Hammond appeared, speaking briefly with Griffith before turning to address Morgan directly. "Captain Steele, this evaluation will determine your continued participation in the program. Captain Griffith is one of our most experienced instructor pilots. His assessment will be final and binding." The message was clear. There would be no appeals, no second chances. Whatever Griffith reported would be accepted as absolute truth, regardless of what actually happened in the air. Morgan climbed into the cockpit, running through startup procedures with methodical precision. The engine roared to life, and she felt the familiar vibration of the powerful fighter beneath her. This was her element, the one place where all the politics and prejudice couldn't follow. In the air, physics didn't care about gender or politics. Aircraft responded to skill and nothing else. As she taxied toward the runway with Griffith in the rear seat, Morgan caught sight of Colonel Bishop standing near the tower, binoculars in hand. His presence suggested he suspected something irregular about this evaluation, but whether he could or would intervene remained to be seen. "Tower, Viper 01 ready for takeoff," Morgan announced over the radio. "Viper 01 cleared for takeoff, runway 21, winds 230 at 15, gusting to 25. Morgan advanced the throttles, feeling the F-15 surge forward with raw power. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the gray sky, and for a brief moment, everything else fell away. Up here, she was finally free. But in the back seat, Captain Griffith was already preparing his narrative of failure, completely confident that by the time they landed, Captain Morgan Steele's career would be effectively over. He had no idea that within the hour, everything would change in ways none of them could possibly anticipate.
The F-15 climbed through the overcast layer, breaking into brilliant sunlight above the clouds. Morgan leveled off at 20,000 feet, the aircraft responding crisply to her inputs despite the gusty conditions. "Begin with a tactical intercept sequence," Griffith ordered from the back seat, his voice cold and professional over the intercom. "Target bearing 090, range 50 miles. Execute beyond visual range engagement." Morgan rolled the aircraft smoothly and began the intercept geometry, her movements fluid and precise. She called out each step of the engagement sequence, demonstrating textbook execution of complex tactical procedures. "Adequate," Griffith said dismissively, though his tone suggested he was annoyed that he couldn't find fault. "Now we'll move to high-G maneuvering. Execute a 9G barrel roll followed by a defensive split S." The maneuvers were designed to be physically punishing, testing not just skill, but endurance under extreme gravitational forces. Morgan pulled the aircraft into the barrel roll, feeling the crushing weight of 9 times normal gravity pressing her into the seat. Her G-suit inflated, squeezing her legs and abdomen to keep blood in her brain. She maintained perfect control throughout the maneuver, rolling inverted, and then pulling through the split S with textbook precision. "Again," Griffith commanded, "higher rate of roll this time." Morgan executed the sequence again,
each iteration pushing the aircraft and her body to their limits. Sweat soaked through her flight suit despite the cockpit cooling system. Her vision began to narrow at the edges from the sustained high G forces, but she maintained perfect control. After the 5th repetition, even Griffith couldn't deny the excellence of her performance. "Proceed to the low-altitude navigation course," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Flight level 500, maximum speed." Morgan descended through the clouds, emerging over the rugged New Mexico desert. She dropped to 500 feet above the terrain and accelerated, the F-15 screaming across the landscape at over 500 knots. The navigation course required threading through virtual waypoints with precise timing while maintaining dangerous proximity to the ground. She flew with absolute confidence, her aircraft positioning perfect at each checkpoint. The ground rushed past in a blur, but Morgan's focus never wavered. This was what she had been born to do. "Your weapons delivery will be next. Target coordinates incoming." Morgan was setting up for the simulated bombing run when something extraordinary happened. The radio crackled with an emergency override signal, a tone that cut through all other communications with absolute priority. Every pilot knew that sound. It meant something critical was happening, something that superseded all normal operations. All aircraft, this is NORAD command. Clear this frequency for priority traffic." Morgan's heart rate spiked. NORAD didn't break radio silence for routine matters. This was real. "NORAD command, aircraft call sign Viper 01. This is NORAD command. Authenticate identity with security code Sierra Whiskey 77 Echo." Morgan's breath caught in her throat. That authentication code was classified beyond top secret. It was tied to her previous assignments, operations that officially didn't exist. Only a handful of people in the entire military even knew those codes existed. "NORAD command, Viper 01 authenticating Sierra Whiskey 77 Echo. Identity confirmed, awaiting traffic." In the back seat, Griffith's confusion was evident. What the hell is going on? NORAD doesn't communicate directly with training flights.
Viper 01, we have a critical situation, the NORAD controller continued, his voice tight with urgency. Multiple unidentified aircraft have penetrated restricted airspace near Kirtland Air Force Base. Conventional intercept attempts have failed. Targets are employing advanced electronic countermeasures and stealth characteristics beyond current threat assessments. Morgan's mind raced. Kirtland housed some of the nation's most sensitive nuclear research facilities. An intrusion there wasn't just serious, it was potentially catastrophic. Viper 01, your previous operational experience makes you uniquely qualified for this intercept. You're authorized to terminate current training activity and proceed immediately to intercept coordinates. Authorization code Tango Delta 94 Romeo. General Victoria Hayes sends her regards and requests your immediate assistance. The world seemed to stop. General Hayes was the NORAD commander, and more importantly, she was one of the few people who knew Morgan's complete service history. The mention of her name was deliberate, a signal that this wasn't just real, it was personal. "What is happening?" Griffith demanded, his earlier confidence replaced by confusion and growing alarm. Morgan didn't answer him. She was already plotting intercept vectors in her mind, calculating fuel states and weapons options. "NORAD command, Viper 01, copies all. Proceeding to intercept coordinates. Request tactical data upload and rules of engagement." Viper 01, data uploading now. You are cleared to use all necessary force to neutralize the threat. Be advised, targets have already evaded 2 F-16s from the alert squadron. They appear to have detailed knowledge of our standard intercept procedures. Morgan felt ice water run through her veins. These weren't amateur pilots. Whoever was flying these aircraft knew exactly what they were doing. "Viper, what are you doing?" Griffith's voice rose with alarm as Morgan rolled the aircraft hard and lit the afterburners. "You can't just abandon an evaluation flight." "Captain Griffith," Morgan said calmly, her voice carrying an authority that made him fall silent. "NORAD command has requested my assistance with a national security emergency. This evaluation is over. I suggest you either help or stay quiet." The F-15 accelerated towards supersonic speed, the desert landscape blurring beneath them. On the tactical display, Morgan could see the data upload from NORAD. multiple radar contacts moving with impossible precision, executing maneuvers that shouldn't be possible for any known aircraft. Her tactical display showed the targets clearly now. 4 contacts moving in a tight formation, heading directly toward Kirtland's most sensitive facilities. The 2 F-16s that had attempted intercept were falling back, their pilots reporting complete systems failures when they approached within 10 miles of the unknown aircraft. Morgan felt ice water run through her veins. These weren't amateur pilots. Whoever was flying these aircraft knew exactly what they were doing. In the back seat, Captain Griffith sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand that the woman he had spent weeks mocking and undermining wasn't just another pilot. She was something far more dangerous, a specialist they had summoned back from the shadows, and now the only thing standing between a critical threat and a national catastrophe.
Morgan pushed the F-15 through Mach 1.2, the desert landscape disappearing beneath them as she closed on the intercept coordinates. Her tactical display showed the 4 unknown aircraft maintaining their course toward Kirtland, seemingly unconcerned about the approaching fighter. NORAD Command, Viper 01 approaching intercept point. Request additional tactical information on target characteristics. Viper 01, targets are exhibiting radar cross-sections consistent with advanced stealth technology, possibly 5th generation or beyond. They've demonstrated ability to jam targeting systems and disrupt aircraft electronics at close range. The 2 F-16s that attempted intercept experienced complete avionics failures at approximately 8 miles. Morgan processed this information rapidly. Electronic warfare capabilities that could disable modern fighters suggested either a near-peer adversary or something even more sophisticated. Her mind went to her previous missions, operations where she had encountered prototype systems that, officially, didn't exist. "What's your plan?" Griffith asked from the back seat, his earlier hostility replaced by something that might have been respect, or perhaps just fear. "The F-16s failed because they used standard intercept profiles," Morgan explained, her hands steady on the controls. "These pilots know our doctrine. They're exploiting predictability. So what are you going to do differently?" "Everything." Morgan dropped the F-15 to low altitude, using the terrain to mask her approach. Instead of coming in from the expected vector, she angled wide, using the desert mountains as cover while she studied the target formation. On her display, she could see the 4 aircraft moving with mechanical precision, their formation too perfect to be human pilots flying manually. Either they had exceptional training or they were using some kind of automated formation keeping system. Viper 01, be advised, target formation is now 15 miles from Kirtland restricted airspace. You are cleared hot for weapons employment. Morgan's finger hovered over the weapon selector, but something didn't feel right. These aircraft were clearly capable of sophisticated electronic warfare, yet they were flying in a tight formation that made them vulnerable to attack. It was almost as if they wanted to be engaged. "NORAD Command, request you contact Colonel Raymond Bishop at Holloman Air Force Base immediately. Tell him to review the flash drive Lieutenant Sophia Morales provided regarding my simulator assessment. Authorization code Sierra Whiskey 77 Echo." There was a brief pause. Viper 01, clarify the relevance of this request to current tactical situation. "Command, I believe these aircraft are testing our response capabilities and looking for specific engagement patterns. They need to know that my assessment data is secured before I engage. If something happens to me, that evidence needs to be protected." In the backseat, Griffith finally understood the full scope of what had been happening. They were trying to wash you out before anyone discovered who you really are. "Later, Captain. Right now, I need you to take manual control of the electronic warfare systems. I'm going to need every advantage we have." "I'm not qualified for combat EW operations," Griffith admitted, his voice tight. "Then it's time to learn. Follow my instructions exactly." Morgan positioned the F-15 for an approach vector the targets wouldn't anticipate, coming in from below and behind using the same terrain masking techniques she had employed in hostile airspace over countries that would remain forever classified.
Viper 01, Colonel Bishop has been contacted. He confirms receipt of your message and is securing the evidence you referenced. General Hayes wants you to know that she has also dispatched a team to Holloman to conduct immediate interviews with your chain of command.
A grim smile crossed Morgan's face. The pieces were falling into place. Even if this intercept went badly, the truth about her treatment would come out. Captain Griffith, on my mark, activate jamming pods with alternating frequency sweep. Don't use standard patterns, randomize the intervals. That's not standard procedure, Griffith protested. That's exactly why it will work. These pilots have been trained against our standard procedures. Mark. Griffith activated the jamming systems with irregular patterns, and Morgan watched her tactical display carefully. The unknown aircraft formation wavered slightly, their perfect spacing disrupted, as their automated systems struggled to compensate for the unexpected electronic interference. "It's working," Griffith said, surprise evident in his voice. "Their formation is breaking down." Morgan pressed her advantage, closing rapidly while the targets were confused. At 5 miles, well outside their effective jamming range, she achieved radar lock on the lead aircraft. "Viper 01 locked on primary target, confirming weapons free?" "Viper 01, you are weapons free. Engage at your discretion." Morgan's finger tightened on the trigger. But in that instant, something extraordinary happened. The 4 aircraft suddenly broke formation, not in evasive maneuvers, but in what appeared to be a surrender pattern. They raised their noses, reduced speed, and activated transponders, broadcasting friendly identification codes. "NORAD command, targets are squawking friendly. Confirm identity." There was intense activity on the radio as controllers scrambled to verify the transponder codes. Finally, the response came back, and it carried a note of embarrassment that was unmistakable even through military radio protocol. "Viper 01, targets are confirmed as experimental drone aircraft from Skunk Works conducting classified systems testing. There was apparently a coordination failure between test operations and NORAD air defense sectors. The drones were operating on proper authorization, but someone forgot to file the flight plan with Air Defense Command." Morgan felt a surge of emotions. Relief that this wasn't an actual hostile incursion, anger at the bureaucratic failure that had created this crisis, and a strange satisfaction that her skills had been validated in the most dramatic way possible. "NORAD Command, Viper 01, copies. Targets are no longer hostile. Request permission to return to base." "Viper 01, permission granted. General Hayes requests you land at Peterson Space Force Base for debriefing. She will meet you there personally." In the backseat, Griffith sat in stunned silence, processing everything that had just occurred. The woman he had spent weeks trying to humiliate had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in standard Air Force doctrine, and now a 3-star general was personally requesting her presence. Morgan turned the F-15 toward Peterson, her mind already shifting to what would come next. The immediate crisis was resolved, but the reckoning for Hammond, Griffith, and everyone else who had participated in her persecution was just beginning. And this time, there would be witnesses who couldn't be ignored.
Peterson Space Force Base appeared through the clouds as Morgan guided the F-15 onto final approach. The landing was smooth and precise despite the turbulent conditions, a final demonstration of the skills that Griffith had spent weeks claiming she didn't possess. As they taxied to the designated parking area, Morgan could see an unusual level of activity on the flight line. Security personnel surrounded a cluster of official vehicles, and at the center stood a woman in uniform whose bearing commanded immediate attention, even from a distance. General Victoria Hayes was exactly as Morgan remembered her, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for absolute intolerance of incompetence or corruption. She had been the one to recruit Morgan into classified operations 8 years ago, recognizing potential that others had overlooked. Morgan shut down the engines and went through post-flight procedures with methodical care. Beside her, in the back seat, Griffith remained unusually quiet, clearly processing the magnitude of what he had just witnessed and what it meant for his career. "Captain Griffith," Morgan said as they prepared to exit the aircraft, "what happens next is going to be difficult for a lot of people, including you." "I know," Griffith replied, his voice subdued. "For what it's worth, Captain Steele, I was wrong about you.
completely and utterly wrong. Morgan climbed down from the cockpit to find General Hayes waiting at the base of the ladder, accompanied by Colonel Bishop and a woman Morgan didn't recognize wearing the insignia of the Air Force Inspector General's office. "Captain Steele," Hayes said, returning Morgan's salute with crisp precision. "It's been too long, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "General Hayes, thank you for the intercept authorization." Hayes's expression was grim. "Thank you for responding. Even though it turned out to be a coordination failure rather than an actual threat, your performance demonstrated exactly why I assigned you to Holloman in the first place." She gestured to the woman beside her. "This is Colonel Sarah Brenner from the Inspector General's office. She has some questions about your treatment at the Fighter Weapons School." Over the next hour, in a secure briefing room, Morgan provided a detailed account of everything that had occurred since her arrival at Holloman. She presented her documentation, the notebook where she had recorded every incident of discrimination and unprofessional conduct. Lieutenant Morales' flash drive provided irrefutable technical evidence of Hammond's sabotage. Colonel Brenner listened with an expression that grew progressively darker as the full scope of the misconduct became clear. "Captain Griffith," Brenner said, turning to where he sat uncomfortably at the far end of the table, "you were directly involved in many of these incidents. What's your perspective?" Griffith swallowed hard, clearly torn between self-preservation and honesty. Finally, he spoke. "Everything Captain Steele has described is accurate. Commander Hammond made it clear from the beginning that he wanted her out of the program. He instructed several of us to make her training as difficult as possible, to find reasons to document her failures." He paused, shame evident in his voice. "I participated willingly. I thought we were maintaining standards. But after today, after seeing what she can actually do, I realized we were just protecting our own egos."
Did you witness Commander Hammond deliberately falsifying the results of her simulator assessment? Brenner asked. Yes, ma'am. The system functioned perfectly. She completed the gauntlet scenario when no one else ever has. Hammond declared it a system malfunction to invalidate her performance. Brenner made notes on her tablet, her expression professionally neutral, but her anger evident in the tension of her jaw. "General Hayes, I believe we have sufficient evidence to proceed with formal charges." Hayes nodded. "Colonel Bishop, I understand you initiated preliminary inquiries before this incident occurred." Bishop leaned forward. "Yes, ma'am. I've been hearing concerns about the training program for several months. When I observed Captain Steele's simulator performance yesterday, I realized the concerns were justified. I contacted your office this morning to request a formal investigation." "Your timing was excellent, Colonel," Hayes said. "It gave us the authority to act immediately when NORAD contacted Captain Steele during her evaluation flight." Morgan felt a piece click into place. "The drone incident wasn't entirely a coordination failure, was it?" Hayes allowed herself a slight smile. "The drones were conducting legitimate testing, but when I learned about the hostile environment you were facing, I may have encouraged NORAD to request your specific assistance in resolving the coordination confusion. I needed to see your capabilities demonstrated in a way that couldn't be dismissed or falsified." Morgan said, not accusingly, but with understanding. "I gave you an opportunity to prove yourself under circumstances that would generate undeniable documentation," Hayes corrected. "Every radio transmission, every radar track, every witness, including Captain Griffith. Commander Hammond can't claim system malfunction when NORAD itself requested your assistance and you successfully resolved a situation that grounded two other fighters." Brenner closed her tablet. "General, I recommend we proceed to Holloman immediately. Commander Hammond and Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore should be informed that they're under investigation before they have opportunity to destroy evidence or coordinate their stories." "Agreed," Hayes stood, her command presence filling the room. "Captain Steele, you'll accompany us. I want you present when we confront Hammond with this evidence." Morgan felt a surge of vindication mixed with something deeper, a sense that justice was finally within reach, not just for herself, but for every pilot who had been driven out of programs they deserved to be in. As they prepared to depart for Holloman, Griffith approached Morgan hesitantly. "Captain Steele, I know an apology doesn't fix what I did, but I want you to know that I'll testify truthfully about everything. Whatever consequences I face, I've earned them."
Morgan studied him for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in his expression. "The fact that you're willing to tell the truth now matters, Captain. It won't erase what happened, but it's a start toward becoming the officer you should have been all along." The flight back to Holloman took less than 30 minutes, but for Morgan, it felt like crossing a threshold between two different lives. Behind her was the woman who had endured weeks of systematic abuse and discrimination. Ahead was the reckoning that would transform not just her situation, but the entire culture that had enabled her persecution.
The convoy of official vehicles rolled through the gates of Holloman Air Force Base just after 1500 hours, their arrival causing an immediate stir among the personnel on base. Word spread quickly that General Hayes was on site, accompanied by the Inspector General's office and an unusually serious-looking Colonel Bishop. Commander Brett Hammond was in his office reviewing training schedules when his door opened without the customary knock. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face until he saw who had entered. General Hayes strode in with Colonel Brenner and Colonel Bishop flanking her. Behind them came Morgan, still in her flight suit, and Captain Griffith, whose expression was carefully neutral. Hammond rose quickly, his face paling as he registered the gravity of the situation. "General Hayes, this is unexpected. If I had known you were visiting, I would have prepared proper reception." "This isn't a courtesy visit, Commander," Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Colonel Brenner is conducting a formal investigation into discriminatory practices and misconduct within your training program." "I'm not aware of any misconduct, ma'am," Hammond replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Brenner stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Commander Hammond, we have extensive documentation of systematic discrimination against Captain Morgan Steele, including deliberate falsification of training records, manipulation of simulator parameters to ensure failure, and creation of a hostile environment designed to force her resignation from the program." "Captain Steele has been treated according to the same standards as every other trainee," Hammond protested. "That's a lie, sir," Lieutenant Morales said from the doorway. "She had appeared along with several other pilots, drawn by the news of the investigation. I witnessed multiple instances of discriminatory treatment. Captain Steele was denied training opportunities, given impossible evaluations, and subjected to harassment from instructors." Hammond's face flushed red. "Lieutenant, you are out of line. Return to your duties immediately." "She's exactly where she needs to be," Hayes interjected coldly, "as are you, Commander. Colonel Brenner has evidence from multiple sources, including recorded data from simulator systems, showing you deliberately invalidated a successful training completion." "The system malfunctioned," Hammond insisted, but his voice had lost its authority. Brenner activated her tablet, projecting the simulator data onto the wall screen. The evidence was irrefutable. Complete recordings of Morgan's gauntlet scenario performance, showing every input, every system response, and Hammond's manual override commands that falsely tagged the session as invalid. "The system functioned perfectly, Commander. You deliberately falsified the results because Captain Steele's success threatened your predetermined narrative that she was unqualified." Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore appeared in the doorway, summoned by urgent message. His confidence evaporated when he saw the assembled officers and the data displayed on the screen. "Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore," Hayes said, turning her attention to him, "you were second in command of this program. Either you were complicit in Commander Hammond's actions, or you failed in your duty to ensure fair and professional training standards. Which is it?" Whitmore's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "I'll tell you which it is," Captain Griffith said, stepping forward. "We were all complicit, ma'am. Commander Hammond made his intentions clear from day one. Captain Steele was not welcome, and we were expected to ensure she failed. I participated in that effort willingly." He paused, his voice thick with shame. "I was wrong. We all were." The room fell silent as the full weight of his admissions settled over everyone present. "Commander Hammond," Colonel Brenner said formally, "you are hereby relieved of command pending court-martial proceedings on charges of conduct unbecoming an officer, falsification of official records, and violations of equal opportunity regulations. Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore, you are suspended from all duties pending investigation." Hammond's face went from red to ashen white. "General, I've served this Air Force for 23 years. My record is exemplary."
Your record, Hayes said with cold precision, shows a pattern of driving qualified pilots out of programs through systematic harassment. Captain Steele is the fourth pilot in 3 years to file complaints about your command. The difference this time is that she had the documentation, the skills, and the courage to see it through to the end. She turned to address the assembled pilots, many of whom had gathered in the hallway. Let me be absolutely clear about something. This Air Force belongs to every qualified pilot, regardless of gender, background, or whether they fit someone's narrow idea of what a fighter pilot should look like. Commander Hammond's behavior doesn't just harm individuals. It weakens our entire service by driving away talent we desperately need. Hayes's gaze swept across the room, landing on each face. Anyone who participated in creating a hostile environment for Captain Steele or any other pilot will face consequences proportional to their involvement. But I also recognize that cultures of discrimination don't emerge overnight, and changing them requires more than just punishing the guilty. It requires everyone here to examine their own actions and commit to doing better. She gestured to Morgan. Captain Steele demonstrated skills today that most pilots in this room will never match. She did so despite weeks of systematic efforts to undermine her confidence and sabotage her training. She completed the gauntlet scenario that's designed to be unbeatable. And when NORAD needed a pilot for a critical intercept, they requested her by name because they knew her actual capabilities, not the fiction Commander Hammond was trying to create. Colonel Bishop stepped forward. Effective immediately, I am assuming direct oversight of the Fighter Weapons School. Major Derek Phillips will serve as acting commander while we conduct a comprehensive review of training procedures. Lieutenant Sophia Morales, your integrity during this investigation has not gone unnoticed. You're being promoted to captain and assigned as deputy commander with specific responsibility for ensuring equitable treatment of all trainees. Morales looked stunned, but she straightened and saluted. Yes, sir. I won't let you down. Hayes turned to Morgan. Captain Steele, you've earned your place in this program 10 times over, but I suspect you're done with Holloman for now. Morgan met her eyes and nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am, I am. Then I'm reassigning you to Peterson Space Force Base as Chief of Advanced Tactics Development. You'll be designing the training programs that the next generation of pilots will use. And this time, those programs will be built on merit, not prejudice. As military police escorted Hammond and Whitmore from the building, Morgan stood among the pilots who had once mocked her, feeling not triumph, but a profound sense of exhaustion mixed with quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, but the price was high for everyone involved.
3 months later, Morgan stood in the briefing room at Peterson Space Force Base, watching as 15 new trainees filed in for their first day of advanced tactics training. The faces were diverse, men and women of various backgrounds, ages, and experience levels. What they all shared was the nervous energy of people about to be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Among them, Morgan noticed a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform crisp and her expression determined but anxious. Her name tag read Lieutenant Emma Kozlov, and something in her bearing reminded Morgan of herself 3 months ago. Welcome to Advanced Tactics Development, Morgan began, her voice carrying easily across the room. I'm Major Morgan Steele, call sign Viper, and I'll be your primary instructor for this program. The promotion to Major had come 2 weeks after the Holloman investigation concluded. General Hayes had personally pinned on her new rank, stating that Morgan's previous classified service had warranted the promotion years ago, but bureaucratic obstacles had delayed it. Some of you may have heard stories about this program's previous iteration, stories about how it was designed to break people rather than build them. Those stories are true, but they're also history. This program is different. She moved to the center of the room, making eye contact with each trainee. You're here because you've demonstrated potential. My job isn't to prove you don't belong. It's to help you become the best pilots you're capable of being. That means pushing you hard, testing your limits, and sometimes letting you fail so you can learn from those failures. But it will never mean setting you up for humiliation or denying you opportunities based on anything other than your actual performance. Lieutenant Kozlov raised her hand tentatively. Ma'am, what's the most important thing we need to know to succeed here? Morgan smiled, remembering asking a similar question once. Competence doesn't announce itself, Lieutenant. It reveals itself through consistent performance and quiet confidence. Your job isn't to be the loudest voice in the room or to prove something to me. It's to master yourself and your aircraft, to learn from every flight, whether it goes perfectly or ends in failure, and to support your fellow pilots rather than competing with them. The briefing continued for another hour, covering program expectations, training schedules, and safety protocols. Morgan noticed that, unlike her own first briefing, this one was free of hostile undertones or loaded questions designed to humiliate. After dismissing the trainees for lunch, Morgan found Captain Sofia Morales waiting outside her office. Morales had transferred to Peterson 2 weeks earlier, bringing her expertise in communication systems to support the new program. How was the first day? Morgan asked. Promising. That Lieutenant Kozlov reminds me of someone. You, 3 months ago? Morales grinned. I noticed that too. Determined, but expecting to have to fight for every inch of respect. She won't have to fight that battle here, Morgan said firmly. That's what we're building, a program where pilots are evaluated on their actual abilities, not whether they fit someone's preconceived notions. A knock on the doorframe interrupted them. Morgan looked up to see Shane Griffith standing there, no longer wearing a uniform, but dressed in civilian business attire. Major Steele, he said formally. I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to stop by before I leave town. Morgan gestured for him to enter. After his testimony during the investigation, Griffith had resigned his commission rather than face potential court-martial charges. He had accepted a position with a civilian aviation company, starting over in a career that no longer carried the prestige of military service. How are you doing, Shane? Morgan asked, surprising herself with the genuine concern in her voice. Better than I deserve to be, he admitted. The civilian job is good. Humbling, but good. I'm teaching basic flight instruction to student pilots, which is about as far from fighter weapons school as you can get. He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. I wanted to thank you.
Thank me? Morgan raised an eyebrow. For not pushing for maximum charges. Colonel Brenner told me you recommended leniency for anyone who testified truthfully. That's why I got to resign instead of facing a court-martial. Morgan studied him for a moment. You made a mistake, Shane. A serious one that hurt people, but you also found the courage to tell the truth when it mattered. That counts for something. Griffith nodded, his eyes reflecting genuine remorse. I've been thinking a lot about why I acted the way I did. It wasn't really about you, not personally. It was about protecting a system I thought I understood, defending standards I believed were important. I convinced myself that keeping people out was the same as maintaining excellence. And now? Morgan asked. Now, I understand that real excellence comes from bringing out the best in people, not from gatekeeping who gets the opportunity to try. He extended his hand. Thank you for teaching me that lesson, Major. I just wish I hadn't needed to learn it the hard way. Morgan shook his hand, seeing in his eyes the kind of genuine transformation that mattered more than punishment ever could. After Griffith left, Morales turned to Morgan thoughtfully. You could have destroyed him completely. Why didn't you? Because the goal was never revenge. It was justice and change. Griffith learned something important, and now he'll carry that lesson forward in everything he does. That's worth more than ending his career would have been. That evening, as Morgan reviewed training plans for the coming weeks, she received a message from General Hayes requesting a video conference. When the general's face appeared on screen, she was smiling with the kind of satisfaction that came from seeing a difficult mission accomplished. Major Steele, I wanted to inform you that the investigation has concluded.
Commander Hammond has been court-martialed and separated from service. Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore accepted non-judicial punishment and early retirement. More importantly, we've identified and corrected similar problems in 3 other training programs across the Air Force. That's good news, ma'am, Morgan said. It's more than good news, it's transformation. Because of what you endured and documented, we're changing how the entire Air Force approaches training evaluation and discrimination prevention. Your experience is being used as a case study in leadership courses, showing both what went wrong and how one officer's integrity exposed systematic failures. Hayes paused, her expression becoming more personal. I know the last few months were difficult, Morgan, but you didn't just survive them. You used them to make the Air Force better for everyone who comes after you. After the call ended, Morgan walked to the window, looking out over the flight line where aircraft sat ready for the next day's training missions. In 3 months, she had gone from being dismissed and mocked to reshaping how the Air Force trained its most advanced pilots. But more importantly, she had proven something that went beyond her own vindication, that systems could change, that courage in the face of injustice mattered, and that true excellence had nothing to do with conforming to narrow expectations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new trainees to mentor, and new opportunities to ensure that no pilot would face what she had faced. The nightmare was over. The dream was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.